Hello! I apologize yesterday for not coming back to you and recording a video journal, but today we have a video journal that is probably, I think this is probably the most important concept I have. It might be in line, honestly, with, the meta-ethical framework. But realistically, this is probably the most important one. Okay. The heuristic or the mental model that I'm going to talk about in this video journal is possibly the most important mental model I have. I think adopting this mental model, or at least some form of it, will help you understand 90% of, probably more, I'd say, at least it'll give you a foundation to understanding all human behavior, including systemic behavior. Now, that's a pretty big claim, Lorenzo. And I'm not someone who makes those all or nothing claims, right? The world isn't black and white. But the world is at least composed of the visible light spectrum, right? There's at least a certainty of color in the real world. Now, again, certainty, sure, if you're going, whatever. Let's not get too philosophical. But ironically enough, we're gonna have to start talking about determinism to begin this journal. Determinism is hard because hardline determinism, the determinism I've adopted, is unintuitive. So much so that a vast majority, I'd say over 90% of philosophers don't adopt hardline determinism. Actually, I think most philosophers are compatibilists. However, most physicists, probably psychologists, probably people that understand how the human brain works and understand how the world works, not world as in human behavior, but literally biology, chemistry, physics, adopt hardline determinism. This is something I've gone from my own anecdotal experience, but also other people's anecdotal experiences, namely Robert Sapolsky. Robert Sapolsky is a good resource if you do want to dive more into hardline determinism. So I highly recommend leaving him there. However, he takes a different approach to hardline determinism. There are various approaches to hardline determinism. His approach is a neurological one, and a brain one, whereas mine is more like a physical approach to hardline determinism. Essentially, there's a couple of prerequisites. There's one prerequisite. There's two prerequisites for the hardline determinism position that I adopt, which is a physicalist approach. I've never heard anyone else discuss it. It's not invented by me. I'm sure it's common. I'm sure other people hold this. I've never dug into this. So I don't know if this is like the physicalist approach. This is just like my interpretation of how the world works, essentially. But if we concede, or if we hold that the laws of physics are true, cause and effect is real, the principle, or one of the principal laws of physics, right? That energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only be transferred, and this transfer is deterministic. If we hold that, I guess you kind of have to dodge like Hume's inference problem, but let's just keep it simple, okay? Let's say cause and effect is true and physics is true. These are like actual rules that dictate how our universe functions. Quick caveat, what you will say is maybe, oh, but what about quantum superpositions? And what about when we start observing the quantum level, it seems like cause and effect, and it seems that the laws of physics kind of break down. In my view, again, I'm not a physicist, I'm not trained in this field, so I'm not I might not be getting something pretty obvious here, but when you abstract from the quantum realm to a more macro realm, even if it's at the level of the atom, as soon as you leave the world of quarks, it seems that the laws of physics come back into play. It seems that no quantum behavior can be observed in the macro world. And macro, again, we're still talking about a very, 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 very microscopic level. But yeah, anytime you're outside of quantum physics, anytime you leave the quantum plane, everything goes back to normal. So I don't believe the quantum realm dictates human behavior, and I don't think it has any impact on it, at least from my, again, anecdotal experience. So we hold that physics is true, physics is real, physics is based and it controls literally everything. And the second thing that we have to hold, and this one actually would probably be more controversial back in the day, but maybe nowadays it's a little more not controversial, but the mind is a physical thing. The thoughts, the feelings, the ideas, your soul all exist within your brain and are all composed by neurotransmitters or chemicals and electrical charges. So you essentially have like transistor-like neurons that are either lit or not lit, and that causes chemical reactions in your brain, which make up thoughts, ideas, consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Now, can I tell you where, consciousness is in the brain? I think that's a little harder, and I don't know if that's that's not a settled science. It's a little more controversial, but we at least know, or it seems that everything is a material thing. Everything happens in your brain space. I will say that it could be possible that there is this level there's immaterial level, so outside of space-time, that exists, that doesn't follow the rules of physics, that makes up our consciousness. We have no evidence to prove that, namely because you can't observe anything outside of space and time, because your observation itself is locked to space and time, is locked to the physical. So I don't believe that we can make any of those assertions. Therefore, I believe we default to the mind is made of matter. If we hold these two things to be true, laws of physics exist and apply to all matter, apply to anything that exists in the material world inside of space-time, and our mind is a material thing that exists within space-time, then we conclude that cause and effect and the laws of physics apply to our mind. And if we conclude that the laws of cause and effect and physics apply to our mind, that means all human thoughts, ideas, behavior, consciousness, all of these things obey the laws of physics, and thus the laws of cause and effect. And if we get to that point where we agree, or we're not concede, but where we hold all of those things to be true, there is no possible conception of free will. There is literally no way that you can control this. Now, when I say control, we have to be clear of what we're talking about here. Again, I've never taken a determinism or free will class. This is all informal Lorenzo ideas, so this might not be best practice. This might not be industry standard. What I'm saying isn't settled science. A lot of this is controversial, but that's essentially the hardline deterministic stance, that all of your thoughts, behaviors, ideas, whatever, all come from past states of being, like momentum and just cause and effect. There's a cause to all of the effects that are your ideas and stuff like that. And of course, your current mental state is going to be a cause for a future effect. But you have no control of it. There is no thing that you can do to break this cause and effect chain. Now, I mean, there's a lot of... the physicalist approach is a little less intuitive. Because, again, I feel like I have free will. I feel like I'm choosing to sit here and talk to you. I want to raise my arm. This is something I'm choosing to do. I don't feel like anybody is forcing me to do this. There is, we didn't evolve this inherent notion of determinism, and I don't believe that's possible. I don't know if our brains could grasp that idea intuitively. But I know I have, or my brain thinks it has free will, but I know we don't, logically. We live in a hardline deterministic universe. I am choosing to, or I feel like I want to raise my arms and stuff like that, but the only reason I'm able to do this is because I have arms in the first place. Okay, so that already sets something. But what's causing my arms to move is my motor units are being fired by my CNS. I don't even know. Maybe it's just my motor neurons. Whatever. My brain is sending signals to my muscles to contract in a certain way to move my arm. Now, where do those signals come from? Well, they come from my brain. But before that, what were they? Well, there were energy and chemicals. And I believe, it's calcium that's being released. There's like calcium pumps that are being released to activate my muscles. Maybe, I don't know. We're getting too specific here. But essentially, my brain wants to do it, and that's why my body is doing it. I am my brain. The ego of Lorenzo is something that exists within my brain. So my brain is more than just me. But my brain is, that doesn't make sense, right? My brain is more than me. How can no, that doesn't make sense. Never mind. Sorry, when we get too deep into philosophy, everything breaks down. We have to be very careful about the language we use, which is very silly. But, let's leave it there because the thing that we're about to discuss is going to touch on hardline determinism. Okay, so let's hold hardline determinism to be true because of those two prerequisites, or those two things that lead to hardline determinism being true. Now what, right? I mean, we have this idea that hardline determinism is true. Should I just lay in my bed and say, oh, nothing matters, whatever, we're all gonna die eventually, take this like hyper-nihilistic position? No, I don't believe so. And I think most people's response is therefore to just say, okay, hardline determinism might be true, but I'm gonna live my life pretending it's not via free will. And that was my position up until I watched this Gray Zone podcast with Robert Sapolsky, who takes a hardline determinism position to be true, like I do, but acts on it. And I never thought of that because, I've always thought it was like a silly, inconsequential position because so what if determinism is true? I don't feel like it is, and I can't gain any benefits by knowing it is true. But internally, what I was doing subconsciously is by realizing that I was actually abstracting, or I was actually figuring out a lot of things because of that. There were a lot of things that relied on hardline determinism to be true, a lot of mental models, and one of them is what I'm about to communicate to you, or I'm about to communicate one of them to you, but I just never put two and two together, I guess. It's a small jump, it's not that complicated, whatever. Essentially, hardline determinism is true, and I hold it to be true. Now, put that in the back of your mind, okay? That's just like a prerequisite of this conversation. I'm actually going to take this because I honestly don't even want to spend that much time on determinism. Maybe we'll make separate arguments, sorry, because this is something we have to discuss generally outside of this. But I'm going to take it. Hardline determinism is true. Put that in the back of your mind. Keep it there. This mental model that I created, that I intuitively stumbled upon, is one of the core mental models I use, and possibly the one I use the most. This mental model can describe all human behavior, and therefore can be abstracted to systems. This can explain how 2008 happened, how 2001 happened. This can explain 2001 being the dot-com bubble, not 9/11, but 9/11 too, I guess. This can explain all warfare. This can explain all love, all hatred. This can explain all addiction and all... What's the opposite of addiction when you get over it? The opposite of addiction. This can literally explain every single human behavior in every single human system. And this is the concept of incentives. Now, my motto, or the label for this mental model, has always been always question incentives. AQI. AQI. Whatever. I've never shortened it. But always question the incentives. Or AQTI. It's a cool, it's an okay name, but it doesn't, hit as much as like perspective shift reality or whatever. Or like ego hacking or friction hacking. Or like being the propaganda minister to your own mind, in the terms of like creating those like internal narratives, which create the rest of your reality. Whatever. I have all these mental models and these sound really cool, but this one's kind of boring. And yesterday I was thinking about this because I was watching The Big Short with my girlfriend, and I was thinking like, wow, everything's incentive based, whatever. Like I've always, when I say always, like I have felt for a long time, or as long as this model's been developed. And as I usually do, I wanted to find content on YouTube discussing this idea, because I always like listening to other people's perspectives on this, and I feel like it adds more flavor to my own. And of course, that's what happened. I searched always question incentives, and I scrolled, and it was like random content. It wasn't really like, I guess I wasn't able to find a mental model. But I found this this Q&A that Charlie, oh shoot, I forgot his name. Sorry, because I'm not like a massive, Charlie Munger. Charlie Munger, Berkshire Hathaway's vice chair, who died in 2023, RIP, had the exact same mental model, and I believe this is another case of those past historical figures died 3 years ago, but these past figures going into the future, hearing me talk, and then going back in time and, adopting these beliefs. Because of course, that's the only explanation, because I'm literally the core of all of this thinking. I'm the first person that's ever thought of any of this, and all of it is my own construction, and anyone else that agrees with me is merely copying me and pretending that they came up with it, okay? Of course. I'm essentially God, okay? And Charlie Munger has, or phrased in a different way, in a far better way, but you know what they say, like perfecting the craft that I created, of course. And his phrase was, he's dead, rip, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. And so much better than mine. And it's so annoying. It's a little longer, it's a little more of a mouthful, but show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome is possibly the greatest name for this. So I'm now adopting it as the name of my mental model. And today's the transition day. So in before mental model transition. But essentially, every single thing in the universe takes the easiest path possible. See, it's an energy, wind, matter, water, whatever it is, electricity, everything always takes the shortest path possible. Now, there's quantum arguments as to why this happened, all right? Like we're superpositioned, or we're going through all possible quantum positions, if we're taking the easiest, whatever. That's super wrong. I'm not a quantum physicist, okay? I don't pretend to know anything about quantum physics. But I saw a Veritasium video, whatever. Everything always takes the easiest shortcut. And cause and effect happens. Incentives are basically the cause and outcome is the effect. He uses this really good, amazing example. Shoplifter. A world that has no hunger is a world that has no hunger-based crime. Obviously, right? Because this should be pretty intuitive. And this whole idea isn't super novel. You already have this intuitive picture in your brain. I'm just tapping into it, and I'm expanding it, and I'm showing you how it literally applies to every single thing. But take the shoplifter. He has to feed his hungry children in a world where his hungry children didn't exist, in a world where there were no hunger-based incentives, there would be no hunger-based crimes as an outcome. However, we live in a world where some people are hungry, and People believe that the only way they can get over this hunger, or they can quench this hunger, is by shoplifting a tomato or two, which aren't very satiating foods. I do like potatoes, but they shoplift the fruit, and what could have been probably was, or actually, in hardline determinism, oh, frick, I shouldn't have crossed this out. Because I know what I meant by consequences. And the point, sorry, this is super jumbled. But, where was I? I don't believe anyone to be good or evil. I believe there to be good or evil actions, or at least actions that are aligned with collective maximization of experience, and actions that aren't aligned with a collective maximization of experience, or maybe aligned with a collective minimization of experience. And that would deem an action to be good or bad, but I don't believe there are good or bad people. What could have been a well-meaning man, what is a well-meaning man? He wants to save his children's life. If put in another context, if his kids were drowning and he jumped in a restricted pond to save their lives, you wouldn't deem it to be criminal or awful, right? But in this case, some would deem it to be criminal because he's stealing from a shop. He's stealing someone else's labor, whatever you want to call it. This well-meaning individual has turned to crime, has committed a bad deed, and we are puzzled by it, right? 2008, no, we're not going to dive into a complicated argument. When you walk, I believe I've used this example in a video journal before, but you walk down a store aisle and you see a kid and their parent. And this kid is throwing a tantrum because he really wants a chocolate, and the parent does not want to give him this chocolate because they don't want him to get fat or whatever. And let's say this kid is throwing a tantrum because they haven't earned it or whatever. This kid is throwing a tantrum, and the dad's like, no, I don't want to, or the parent is like, no, I'm not going to give you that. Let's go. And the kid's like screaming and rolling on the ground and like slamming the ground or whatever. And to you, to a neutral third-party observer, you see it as like, wow, this kid is so, like, he's being so evil. You wouldn't say that, but you're looking at that behavior and you're saying this behavior is uncalled for and it's wrong. But then, at the end of the day, or at the end of the tantrum, or what ends the tantrum, is eventually the parent gives in and gives him the kid. Gives him gives the candy to the kid. What you have just witnessed is incentive alignment to poor behavior. What you have witnessed is a kid portraying antisocial, poor behavior and getting rewarded for it, getting incentivized to do it. So no wonder he did it in the first place, and no wonder he's going to do it again in the future, because it works. It gets him the goal. We have this concept in dog training too, right? When your dog is doing something bad, you want to disincentivize that bad. You want to disincentivize that behavior. So you punish them in a certain way. You give them a negative stimulus. And whenever your dog is doing something good, you give them positive stimulus. You incentivize the behavior. I think the issue is that we as rational, critical thinking, for the most part, humans don't believe that we're like this. You know, this only happens to kids and animals, right? We have rational minds who are above all of this and don't fall victim to these things. But the truth is, it's probably the other way around. The more rational, the more logical you are, the bigger of a victim you might be to incentives. Because, let's say that shoplifter, if he's like a regular old, emotionally driven, not rational at all shoplifter, he might not even steal the food. He might turn to crack, to crack dealing or whatever, to then be able to buy the kid food, whatever. But, you know, he's going to feel bad about it. There's going to be emotions. He'll be like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, but I have to do this or whatever. But the rational agent, the hyper-rational agent, the hyperlogical agent will look at that action and say, this is a good thing. This is what I should be doing to feed my kids. You rationalize it. Does that make sense? You create this barrier or this shield, this bubble around the action, and it suddenly becomes justified. it suddenly becomes righteous in a rational way. And that can cause a lot bigger problems because that makes the incentives a lot stronger. That makes you a lot more buried in the position, because now not only do you have the external incentive of your kids are starving, but you have your internal incentive of this is rational and I ought to do the rational thing because I have learned throughout my life that doing the rational thing is better. So you're incentivized by that previous behavior and by that internal mental model that you have. So I don't think anyone is safe from this, essentially because we all work the same way. We're all made of energy that is bent and contorted in certain ways that create the world that we occupy and create our own internal worlds and create us. This mental model can be applied to literally anything, and I have tried to apply it to a lot of things. Or try to apply it to everything. Let's talk about the systemic level at first. 2008. It's just the most recent example, so it's buried in my mind. But essentially, 2008 started with this guy, I think it was one guy, maybe it was a couple of dudes, in like the 70s or 80s, that created this thing called a mortgage-backed security. Mortgage-backed securities. Mortgages are loans that you take on your house, right? So you buy a house, or you take out a loan to buy a house, and you owe the bank a certain, usually fixed interest rate, and you pay them over the years until your debt is repaid, and then you own the house fully, right? Mortgages are typically safe securities. They're typically safe assets, or mortgage debt is typically very safe for a bank because who doesn't pay their mortgage, right? You need a house to live in. Your mortgage is probably going to be the first thing that you pay off every single month if you're a normal, rational human. Most humans are rational about, wanting to have shelter, wanting to have a home. Nobody wants to default on their mortgage. Defaulting means I'm not going to explain everything. This is going to take. This is not 2008. I'm not going to redo Inside Job or The Big Short. Okay, you can go. I highly recommend watching this movie. It's super fun and amazing. And I think the 2008 financial crisis is incredibly critical for everyone to understand. And it's a really good example of perverse incentives shaping the world. But yeah, these mortgage-backed securities, and it was all but okay, mortgages are super cool and based because everyone pays them, so they're very safe. But also the interest rate is going to be very low, and your return on your debt or the interest payments isn't going to be very high. So it's kind of a boring asset to own. It's like bonds. However, there are bonds. There are mortgage bonds. And bonds are typically a very boring asset because the interest rate is low, despite being very safe, usually AAA rated. So what they did is they collated a bunch of mortgages and threw them together in one security that you can buy. All of this means is that instead of buying or trading one mortgage bond, you're trading 100 at the same time. There's more than hundreds, thousands of mortgages, but let's just call it 100 for now for the sake of simplicity. So you've 100x your interest payments. So in theory, it's still an incredibly secure asset because who doesn't pay their mortgage? And arguably it can be even more secure because you've diversified, which is a little foreshadowing for the future, but you've diversified your security. Your security is basically composed of a lot of different securities or a lot of different mortgages. And if one fails, it's 1 out of 100 that are failing, right? Defaulting. And this is already something that is super rare to happen. So amazing, higher interest because they're all collated and they're very secure. The only issue is eventually started running out of mortgage bonds. The demand outweighed the supply, outpaced the supply, and eventually we started running out of AAA rated mortgage bonds. So what people started doing is they started taking what are called subprime mortgages. Let's just call them riskier mortgages with adjusted rate loans, adjusted rates. Essentially, you've taken a super highly secure security with very low interest rate, so low risk, low reward, into a high risk, high reward security, where because they were given to people that were less likely to pay their mortgages, I mean, at one point there were even like ninja rate loans, which is no income, no job loan. I mean, we got to insane levels of lending. I mean, 2008 is incredible. I just watched Chernobyl, and Chernobyl is actually maybe I'll touch on Chernobyl after this. It might have been actually an easier example, but this feels like the Western equivalent of Chernobyl. Essentially, yeah, we started getting all of these subprime mortgages being thrown in with the prime mortgages, the higher AAA rated mortgages. So let's say we have 99 mortgages and we need 100 to make this bundle of mortgages, this mortgage-backed security. I believe that's what that is. And let's say we have 99 AAAs, but we're out of AAAs and we're not going to get another AAA for like whatever X amount of time. And we need another mortgage to form the security. So let's just throw in like a double A, or a single A, or triple B, or double B, or single B loans. So we get some like insanely awful subprime mortgages, and we start, cramming them in. And eventually, we start running out of the AAA mortgages that were forming the bedrock. So we start looking at other types of loans. Maybe we'll look at car payments or car loans that are far more risky, but still the default rate was low and they were still safe, but not as safe as a mortgage. And we might start increasing the percentage of subprime loans. So eventually, what was rated as a 100% AAA security went to a 90%, and then an 80%, and then a 75, and a 70, and then a 65. 65 to 70% AAA rated mortgage-backed security that was actually made up of 99% single B, or okay, not single B, but subprime shit. Okay, I apologize for the swearing, but doodle fart securities. And these were called CDOs, collateralized debt obligations. Basically, you got a lot of debt obligations, a lot of different types of debt obligations, like car loans or mortgages. I can't seem to think of any other, maybe credit card loans or whatever, or credit card debt. And you grabbed all of this and you put it into a CDO. But the argument was, because you have so many different types of securities within this CDO, because you have so many different types of assets, so many different types of debt, because it's an asset to some, but debt to others, because you're the one getting it, whatever. You have mortgages, you have car loans, and whatever other type of debt obligations you have. Suddenly it's diversified. So, they say, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. What if you put what if you put one egg in each basket, but each basket was made of human fecal matter? Well, it's still a lot of baskets. So the chance of all of them failing is ridiculous, right? So you have these insanely disgusting, toxic CDO fecal tanks, okay? Waste tanks that are now being rated AAA or super safe and prime that are being rated highly because they're so diversified. Essentially, you have financial institutions, you have the world economy being based, or at least the American economy, which is one of the fundamental pillars of the world economy, being completely covered, or the foundations being completely made out of human fecal matter. Eventually, it's going to rain a little bit, or eventually, the human fecal matter is going to start slipping, is going to start, disintegrating or whatever, and the whole building is going to come down, is going to get completely demolished. There was a certain level of whatever. And of course, one day that happened, and it was 2008. And we got the 2008 global financial crisis that wiped people's life savings, that destroyed people's homes, that destroyed people's lives. And of course, it's, funny to think of, the stupid, the toxic CDOs and the sheer insanity, collective insanity that the world was going through. But at the end of the day, it's also horrific, and it's saddening to see the amount of people that lost everything. I mean, pensions were wiped overnight. People's life savings disapparated. I mean, the sheer loss of what I would call human potential, human capital, because you could also call, was horrifying. And of course, basically one of the only things that the state did is it forced banking institutions to have, I think it was like a minimal reserve deposit or whatever, so you have to have at least a certain amount of liquid cash to be able to create some like padding if this happened again. But of course, now we have Klarna, buy now, pay later. We have predictive markets. We have all of these private equity. We have all these other financial institutions, which are almost completely unregulated, and possibly all going through the same issue. Whatever, but that's a story for another day. It's horrifying to think of that too. But essentially, incentives. We, from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, from the rating institutions, to the insurance providers for these mortgages, to the banks selling the mortgages, buying the mortgages, to the mortgage providers, we have incredibly perverse incentives. These systems were not aligned with the well-functioning of the financial institutions. People selling the mortgages were incentivized to give out subprime mortgages, were incentivized to give out these ninja loans, were incentivized to sell all of these toxic mortgages, all these poop. They were incentivized to grab poop and give it to people because they turned a buck and because the banks would buy it. So they would profit more from these ninja loans, from these adjustable rate loans, stuff like that, because their premiums were higher for these things. Essentially, they were incentivized to sell poop. So of course, they sold poop. Then you had the banks that were creating these incentives for the mortgage sellers, but they were also incentivized to create these CDOs, to create these incredibly toxic mortgage-backed securities, to create these waste tanks of a lot of different poop. Because of course, if it's poop from you and poop from me and poop from the dog, it's diversified, so it's super kosher and super chill. But they were incentivized to gather all this poop and sell it off because they would make money from these things. The market was hot. Houses were selling like poop to poop flies or whatever. Basically, things were flying off the shelves, so they were incentivized to create these things. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the rating agencies were... did they get money? I don't know. I didn't look into the rating. I don't know why the rating agencies were so ridiculous, but it was definitely incentives too, and they at least didn't have any incentives blocking them, like the law, for example, which also has been very minimally revised through like the Dodd-Frank Act, I believe, which was passed under Obama. And basically, it was a culmination of incredibly stupid, or not incredibly stupid, but incredibly misaligned incentives that, of course, created one of the biggest economic catastrophes of the 21st century. Oh, no, the biggest catastrophe, the economic catastrophe of the 21st century, but one of the biggest economic catastrophes of recent times, of like 6 or 7 decades. Awful, terrible, oh, really bad, whatever, sucks balls. Chernobyl. Basically, you have this Soviet state that's designed to, or their incentives are to look good. Their incentives are for long-term party members, for lifelong party members to climb up the ranks. And sometimes you have to judge the numbers around. I highly recommend watching these shows with the mental model of incentives. What are the incentives right now? And everything will be incredibly clear for you. Watch The Big Short, watch Inside Job, watch Chernobyl. Literally watch any documentary about almost anything that has ever happened and think incentives, incentives, incentives. Look around you. Look at the world that's around you. Let's think right now. I'm recording this video journal. Why am I recording this video journal? Because I like to, right? I'm incentivized to speak, to improve my cognition, to help me understand these things a little better. And, I'm kind of like leveraging almost the Feynman technique to help me do that. I'm incentivized to create content because these platforms exist, and I'm also partially incentivized by external validation. all these incentives exist, and of course the outcome is this. Now, why, let's think of more things. AI, okay, and this is something that's a little close to home, but AI alignment. This is one of the first things that first helped me truly clock this incentive alignment thing. It was in 2023. Essentially, the concept of AI alignment has existed even before the transformer models, but especially after the transformer models, GPT-3, so on, GPT 2.5 actually probably, and so on. And basically the whole concept is, if we get a super intelligent AI that's aligned with human flourishing, that sees its job is to create human flourishing, we will see human flourishing. So if we have a super intelligent AI that's aligned with humanity, we have utopia. If we have a super intelligent AI that is misaligned with humanity, you've heard of, if you're into AI, you've probably heard of AI alignment, but if we have a misaligned super intelligent AI system, we have a system of dystopia. We have potentially the greatest existential threat to humanity ever since the foundation of this universe. Take the paperclip example, which I believe is a common example in the AI alignment space. If you have an AI whose sole job is to create paperclips, their incentive, their number one incentive, their goal is to create paperclips. That's their goal. Sorry, that's their goal. What you will see is a lot of paperclip creation, right, as an outcome. But what you also might see is, let's say there is a favela, shantytown, or whatever next to the AI factory, and it needs to expand its AI factory. And it looks at this shantytown and it's saying, okay, if I demolish this, or if I get my humans to demolish this, or my robot extensions, my consciousness, or whatever, to demolish this, I can build more paperclip factory components, more paperclip factory assembly lines, or whatever, and create more paperclips. My only job is to create more paperclips, therefore I'm going to destroy this. And eventually you basically get this end goal where Earth has become just a massive paperclip factory, where you have this AI whose only goal is to create these paperclips, and therefore is misaligned with humanity. The misalignment comes from its primary incentive not being the development of human flourishing. I can keep going on and on and on and give you 50 trillion examples of incentives being the number one key thing in system things, but I think I've proven my point there. Let's talk a little bit about the individual. These video journals have mostly consisted of me. No, they've consisted of some introspection, I believe. I believe I've been a little introspective, but I think it's also important to show you how this can actually affect your individual behavior. It's not just system crafting, and it's not just like creating the best. Sorry. This is just a foundation for Lighthouse capitalism. Now, if you watched my previous video journal on Lighthouse capitalism, you would know that the job of, this will make no sense if you haven't, but highly recommend you do, is the job of the state is incentive alignment. At least that's what I deem the job of the state to be. Well, the job of the state is to maximize human flourishing, and the best way you can do that is through incentive alignment. Or the way it should do that is through incentive alignment. We have all companies working on a private for-profit model. Therefore, they're all incentivized by profit, and profit is dictated by the state. What is profitable is dictated by the state through tax credits, subsidies, and fines, for example. Through leveraging these financial instruments of the state can then dictate what profit is, and therefore can control the incentives for companies. That's an example of this playing in action, like policy that I would like to see, or my personal political or economic philosophy. But in the personal level, sorry, my brain's starting to get a little fried from this conversation. There's so much to talk about, but in the personal level, let's think about personal incentives. Do I want to do this right now? What are the incentives saying? I'm incentivized to do. Are the incentives even that strong? I think I've made the point. But, okay, let's keep this system-based for now. We'll talk about personal stuff later, but you can probably think about this, okay? Just think about the incentive. Every time you do something today, if you're watching this, every single time you do something, every single time you commit an action or a thought, think of the incentives behind it. And the more you do that, the more you introspect about why you're doing the things that you're doing, the more control you'll have over things, because you can start shifting and manipulating the incentives to align with what you want to do. For example, do I want to dive into this? Yeah, let me give you a quick example. No, I can't think of anything. Never mind, I'm not going to do this. Okay, just think about that. Adopt this mental model for a week, or even for a day, or even for an hour, and just think about literally everything, and try to think of the incentives. And I'm telling you, 1,000,000,000% you're going to understand the world far greater than you have up until now, or far better, or at least more up until now. This is also what I want the foundation of my articles to be. So of my publication, The Rock Report, and I want to make show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome, the foundational theory for The Rock Report. In all the systems that I want to diagnose, and in all of the observations that I want to make about the systems that we live in, I want to question the incentives and the fixes that I want to provide. I want to provide incentive-based fixes for all these things. For example, social media algorithms, which is something that I'm yet to discuss. It's such a big take of mine too. It is like the Lorenzo take too. So I'm surprised I haven't made a video journal on it yet. But I think because it's such a big mountain, I'm like climbing all the little ones first before I get to that big one. But essentially, we live in a world where social media companies are incentivized by time on platform. They want to sell ads. That's their primary, almost sole business model. And to sell ads, they need people to sell the ads to. Therefore, they want to keep people on the platform for as long as possible so they can sell you more ads. Now, that means that they're going to derive their algorithms are going to be modeled in that incentive structure of keep people on platform for longest. What that causes is perverse incentives where the algorithms, the social media algorithms, which basically function as our town squares nowadays, aren't designed to provide accessible communication, aren't designed to help in the pursuit of truth or to create a common epistemic ground or for human flourishing, but they're designed to feed you like pigs in a slop factory so they can fatten you up and slaughter you in the name of the hemorrhoid pill that they're trying to sell you. This advertisement model is completely incompatible with human flourishing and requires major incentive realignment, which is something that we'll discuss in future journals. But this is an example of one of the ways we should approach topics. Anyways, I think I've had enough for this video journal. It's been like 50 minutes. And dude, it is so early. It is 11:30, which means I started recording those at like 10:45 or whatever. What I want to do now is I want to go have breakfast. So I can probably go to the gym at like 1 p.m. And I'm going to have breakfast and then I'm going to play Crusader Kings, A Game of Thrones until I go to have, or should I write my next article? I'm going to finish my visa application first, and then we'll see. Let's take at least one of the items off of today's to-do list. Anyways, I love you so very much, and go question some fucking incentives, shawty, okay? I love you so much, and I will see you tomorrow. Let's see what the incentives lead us to.